There are moments in history so extraordinary that even the greatest empires try to erase them forever. Stories that rulers feared, witnesses they desperately wanted silenced, and truths so powerful that no prison, no execution, and no kingdom could bury them. This is one of those stories. Imagine standing at the edge of the 1st century, when the echoes of Jesus Christ still lingered in the memories of those who had actually walked beside him. Nearly every voice that had carried his message across the known world had already been extinguished in blood. Peter had been crucified upside down beneath the authority of Rome. Paul had laid his head upon the executioner's block. James had fallen beneath Herod's sword. Thomas had journeyed farther than anyone imagined, only to meet death by the spear in distant lands. Andrew, Philip, Bartholomew, Matthew, Simon the Zealot, Jude, and the others had all embraced martyrdom rather than deny the one they had seen risen from the dead. He was no longer the fiery young fisherman whose ambition once earned him the nickname, Son of Thunder. His hair had turned white with age, his body had grown frail from decades of hardship, but his memories remained sharper than any sword in Rome. This elderly man had leaned against Jesus during the Last Supper. He had stood beneath the cross while others fled in fear. He had watched his teacher breathe his final breath. He had accepted the responsibility of caring for Mary, the mother of Jesus. He had raced toward an empty tomb before sunrise and witnessed the evidence that changed history forever. His name was John, and he carried something no emperor could manufacture and no philosopher could imitate. He was a living eyewitness. Every sermon he preached was not based upon rumor or legend. Every word flowed from personal experience. When he spoke about Christ, he spoke as someone who had heard his voice, touched his hands, and watched him transform countless lives. Across the Roman world, believers treasured him as the last surviving apostle, the final bridge connecting the growing church to its very beginning. Yet while Christians looked to John with hope, another man sat upon a throne with a very different vision for the future. His name was Domitian, Emperor of Rome, a ruler consumed not merely by political power but by personal worship. Unlike many emperors before him, Domitian demanded something that reached beyond taxes or military service. He insisted that every citizen publicly acknowledge him as Lord and God. Across cities and provinces, statues of the emperor stood as symbols of absolute authority. Incense burned before his image. Public ceremonies reinforced loyalty. Refusing to participate was not considered a harmless religious choice. It was interpreted as an act of rebellion against the empire itself. To Rome, worship and politics had become inseparable. Anyone who refused the emperor's divine honors challenged the stability of the state. Christians therefore found themselves trapped between two loyalties. They prayed for the emperor, respected governing authorities, and obeyed civil law whenever possible. But worship belonged to Christ alone. That single conviction transformed ordinary men and women into enemies of the empire. Throughout Asia Minor, fear quietly spread from house to house. Families gathered before dawn in hidden rooms. Hymns were whispered instead of sung aloud. Letters passed secretly from congregation to congregation. Every knock at the door could announce another arrest. Every unfamiliar face in the marketplace might be an informer. Yet despite growing danger, the Christian faith continued spreading with remarkable speed, especially from one remarkable city that served as the beating heart of the region, Ephesus. Rising beside a magnificent harbor, Ephesus was among the wealthiest and most influential cities in the Eastern Roman Empire. Massive merchant ships crowded its docks carrying spices, marble, silk, wine, and precious metals from every corner of the Mediterranean. Its enormous theater seated around 25,000 spectators. Scholars debated in its streets. Wealthy merchants financed magnificent public buildings. Above all, the city proudly displayed the colossal temple of Artemis, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. Pilgrims traveled thousands of miles simply to admire its towering columns and offer sacrifices to its celebrated goddess. Religion, commerce, and civic identity merged into a single powerful system that generated immense wealth. Every festival, every marketplace, every procession reminded citizens that Artemis watched over Ephesus. But another movement had quietly begun transforming the city from within. People who once purchased idols now abandoned them. Families once devoted to pagan rituals gathered instead to remember Jesus. Entire households rejected the old gods, embracing a faith centered not on temples of stone but on the risen Christ. At the center of this remarkable transformation stood the elderly apostle John. From Ephesus, he lovingly guided 7 churches scattered across the province of Asia. He knew their strengths, their fears, and their hidden struggles. Messengers traveled dusty Roman roads carrying letters, requests for prayer, and heartbreaking reports of persecution. John listened to every story with the tenderness of a spiritual father. He understood the crushing poverty endured by believers in Smyrna. He knew the relentless pressure facing Christians in Pergamum, where emperor worship dominated public life. He recognized the difficult compromises confronting tradesmen in Thyatira, whose livelihoods often depended upon participating in idol feasts. He grieved over the spiritual emptiness concealed beneath the impressive reputation of Sardis. He admired the perseverance of little Philadelphia, whose faith far exceeded its resources. And he worried deeply for prosperous Laodicea, where wealth slowly cooled hearts that once burned with passion for God. To each congregation, John offered not distant instruction but deeply personal encouragement, because he knew their names, remembered their tears, and carried their burdens as though they were his own children. Yet as Christianity quietly flourished, powerful men began noticing something else. Every new believer represented more than a religious conversion. It meant fewer sacrifices purchased for pagan temples. Fewer silver idols sold in crowded marketplaces. Fewer pilgrims financing local priests. Every soul that followed Christ weakened a system that had enriched influential leaders for generations. What had once seemed like an obscure movement was now becoming an undeniable threat to both religious prestige and economic power. And somewhere in the shadows of magnificent Ephesus, men whose fortunes depended upon the old gods quietly began asking a dangerous question that would soon place the last living apostle directly in the crosshairs of the Roman Empire. The conspiracy did not begin with soldiers storming through the streets or with an emperor issuing a dramatic public decree. Like many of history's darkest moments, it began in whispered conversations behind closed doors. In the grand courtyard surrounding the temple of Artemis, influential priests gathered with wealthy silversmiths whose workshops had supplied the city with countless statues of the goddess for generations. For years they had watched an unsettling change unfold before their eyes. Pilgrims still arrived, festivals still filled the streets, and sacrifices still burned upon the altars, but something was undeniably different. Every month, more citizens quietly abandoned the old ways. Families once devoted to Artemis no longer purchased silver idols. Merchants refused to participate in rituals honoring pagan gods. Craftsmen declined to offer incense before imperial statues, even when doing so threatened their businesses. What alarmed these leaders most was not that Christianity existed, but that it continued to grow despite relentless opposition. Its followers did not conquer cities with armies or influence governments through wealth. They transformed lives one heart at a time. Men who had lived for greed suddenly became generous. Women who had lived in fear discovered remarkable courage. Slaves and masters knelt together in the same gatherings, calling one another brothers and sisters. Such unity challenged the deeply rooted social order of the Roman world. To the priests of Artemis, this movement was draining both spiritual authority and financial prosperity. To local officials, it threatened civic loyalty. And to those whose influence depended upon maintaining the ancient religious system, one elderly man seemed to stand at the center of it all. John rarely appeared in public spectacles. He did not command armies or hold political office. Yet his quiet presence carried extraordinary influence. His words reached villages he had never visited. His counsel settled disputes between churches separated by hundreds of miles. His testimony inspired believers to endure suffering rather than surrender their faith. He represented something Rome could never manufacture, credibility born from personal experience. No philosopher could claim to have stood beneath the cross. No priest of Artemis could claim to have spoken face to face with the risen Christ. John could. Every conversation with him reminded listeners that Christianity rested not upon mythology but upon eyewitness testimony. Removing John would not erase the faith, but it could shake the confidence of countless believers who still treasured the last living apostle. That realization slowly transformed private resentment into organized action. Formal accusations were carefully prepared, not because they were true, but because they sounded convincing within Roman law. John, they claimed, encouraged secret assemblies hidden from public oversight. He persuaded citizens to reject traditional worship that had united the empire for centuries. He weakened civic loyalty by refusing to honor the emperor's divine authority. Some even accused him of practicing dangerous magic, alleging that unexplained healings and extraordinary conversions proved he possessed supernatural powers hostile to Rome itself. These charges required little evidence. In an empire increasingly suspicious of Christians, mere accusation often carried enough weight to begin a prosecution. Meanwhile, John remained completely unaware of the machinery turning against him. His days followed a rhythm shaped by decades of faithful service rather than fear. At sunrise he often met with elders who had become shepherds of local congregations. They discussed families struggling under persecution, widows needing support, travelers carrying news from neighboring churches, and young believers seeking guidance in understanding the teachings of Christ. His greatest concern was never preserving his own safety but strengthening the faith of others. Having watched nearly every fellow apostle embrace martyrdom, John understood that his own earthly journey could end at any moment. Yet age had replaced youthful impulsiveness with remarkable peace. Those who spent time with him noticed that he spoke less than he once had, but every sentence seemed richer with wisdom earned through suffering. His voice carried neither bitterness toward Rome nor hatred toward his persecutors. Instead, he constantly returned to the command Jesus had repeated on the night before his crucifixion, that his followers should love one another as he had loved them. It amazed many younger Christians that a man who had endured decades of hardship still radiated compassion rather than resentment. They did not yet realize that such peace would soon be tested before the eyes of the entire empire. One evening, as believers quietly gathered inside a modest home on the outskirts of Ephesus, John met with several presbyters to pray and encourage them before they returned to their respective congregations. Lamps flickered softly against stone walls while familiar psalms were recited in hushed voices. Outside, the streets gradually emptied as darkness settled across the city. Then came the sound everyone dreaded, a heavy knock at the entrance. Conversation ceased instantly. Faces turned toward the doorway. For a brief moment, no one moved. They all understood what that sound could mean. The door opened, revealing Roman officers accompanied by local authorities carrying official warrants bearing the imperial seal. There was no shouting, no struggle, and no desperate attempt to escape. John slowly rose from his place among the believers, his weathered face remarkably calm. He had witnessed scenes like this many times before. Years earlier, armed men had entered another gathering in Jerusalem to seize Jesus himself. Since then, Peter, Paul, James, and so many others had walked similar paths toward imprisonment and death. The old apostle recognized that history had finally reached him as well. Younger believers instinctively stepped forward as though to shield him, but John gently motioned for them to remain where they were. There would be no violence, no resistance, no fear. According to those present, he quietly offered words of encouragement instead of farewell, reminding them that earthly rulers possess authority only for a season, while the kingdom of God endures forever. Even the Roman officer assigned to arrest him reportedly seemed surprised by the prisoner's composure. Most men trembled when imperial soldiers arrived. Some begged for mercy. Others cursed their captors. John did neither. He simply surrendered himself, carrying nothing except the peace that had matured through more than 60 years of following Christ. As chains were fastened around the wrists of the elderly apostle, many in the room struggled to hold back tears. They feared they were witnessing the final moments of the last surviving eyewitness to Jesus. John, however, turned once more toward the grieving believers and smiled with quiet assurance. Long before that night, he had already entrusted his life to God. Whatever awaited him beyond the prison gates, he believed it could never separate him from the one he had known since the shores of Galilee. Under the cover of darkness, Roman guards escorted him through the silent streets of Ephesus toward the harbor. Behind them, hidden in windows and narrow alleyways, believers watched in sorrowful silence as the figure who had guided an entire generation disappeared into the night. None of them could have imagined that this arrest, intended to erase the final apostolic witness from history, would instead become the beginning of one of Christianity's most extraordinary chapters, a journey that would carry an aging prisoner across stormy seas, into the heart of imperial Rome, before the judgment of an emperor who believed himself to be a god. Long before dawn broke over the harbor, the prisoner was led aboard a weather-beaten transport vessel built not for comfort but for survival. It was the kind of ship Rome routinely used to move soldiers, criminals, and supplies across the Mediterranean, a floating prison where human dignity carried little value. The air was thick with the smell of salt, wet timber, sweat, tar, and seawater that had soaked into the planks over countless voyages. Iron chains clinked against the deck as prisoners were ordered below, where narrow spaces forced strangers to sit shoulder to shoulder for days at a time. Among them were thieves awaiting punishment, debtors whose fortunes had collapsed, deserters who had abandoned military service, and men accused of crimes they insisted they had never committed. Into the middle of these hardened faces walked an old man whose appearance seemed entirely out of place. His back was slightly bent by age, his beard had turned almost completely white, and deep lines marked a lifetime of labor, sorrow, and faith. Yet unlike the others, no bitterness could be found in his eyes. John carried himself with a quiet confidence that puzzled even the guards assigned to watch him. Most prisoners spent the journey cursing Rome, complaining about their fate, or begging the soldiers for mercy. John did none of those things. Instead, he observed the frightened faces around him with compassion, speaking gently whenever opportunity arose. To one man consumed by fear, he offered words of hope. To another grieving the family he might never see again, he listened without interruption. During freezing nights, when exhausted prisoners tried unsuccessfully to sleep against damp wooden walls, the elderly apostle quietly prayed, not for his own release, but for the people surrounding him. Several guards began noticing that arguments seemed to lessen whenever the old prisoner spoke. Even among men who had spent years surviving through violence and deception, his calm presence slowly changed the atmosphere below deck. They did not know they were sharing the voyage with the last living apostle of Jesus Christ, they only knew there was something profoundly different about him. The Mediterranean could be breathtakingly beautiful, but it could also become merciless without warning. As the vessel moved farther from the coast of Asia Minor, calm waters gave way to rough seas driven by powerful winds. Massive waves slammed against the wooden hull with thunderous force, causing the entire ship to groan under the strain. Rain swept across the deck in icy sheets while sailors shouted desperate commands above the roar of the storm. Prisoners stumbled as the vessel pitched violently from side to side, many becoming violently seasick while others believed each crashing wave might be their last. For John, however, storms were nothing new. Decades earlier, he had crossed another sea with Jesus himself. He still remembered that terrifying night on the Sea of Galilee when experienced fishermen believed death was certain until Christ spoke only a few words, and the wind and waves instantly obeyed. That memory remained more vivid than the storm now surrounding him. While fear spread through the ship, John rested in a confidence built not upon favorable circumstances but upon the faithfulness of God through every trial he had already endured. The sea that frightened everyone else reminded him of countless moments when divine power had revealed itself precisely where human strength failed. Even if this voyage ended beneath the waves, he believed his life remained safely in the hands of the one who had conquered death itself. Days eventually turned into weeks as the vessel continued westward toward the heart of the Roman Empire. Each sunrise carried the prisoners farther from everything familiar. Food was scarce, consisting mostly of coarse bread, dried grains, and stale water rationed with little generosity. Cold nights settled heavily upon aging bones, making every movement painful for the elderly apostle. Yet despite physical exhaustion, John never surrendered to despair. Those sharing the voyage began asking him questions. Some wondered why an old man had been arrested at all. Others questioned what crime could justify transporting someone of his age across the empire in chains. John answered with remarkable simplicity. He did not portray himself as a hero or speak with anger toward those who had arrested him. Instead, he explained that he belonged to Jesus Christ and could not worship any earthly ruler as though he were God. Some prisoners laughed at what sounded to them like foolish devotion. Others remained strangely silent, sensing that the conviction behind his words could not be explained by stubbornness alone. One evening, as the sun disappeared beneath the western horizon and painted the sea in shades of crimson and gold, a young guard finally asked the question everyone had been wondering. "Did you truly know this Jesus?" The old apostle paused before answering. His voice was quiet, but every prisoner nearby listened. "I knew him," he replied. "I walked beside him. I heard him teach. I watched him heal the broken. I saw him die. And I saw the world forever changed because death could not hold him." For a few brief moments, the noisy lower deck became completely silent. Even men who doubted his story recognized they were hearing testimony, not legend. John spoke as someone remembering a lifelong friend rather than repeating ancient tradition. Eventually, after an exhausting voyage, the great city of Rome appeared upon the horizon. Its towering monuments, sprawling districts, crowded streets, and imperial architecture reflected unimaginable power. This was the capital of an empire stretching across continents, where emperors issued commands that affected millions of lives and where countless prisoners disappeared into history without anyone remembering their names. As the ship entered the harbor, John looked upon the city where both Peter and Paul had sealed their testimony with their blood years earlier. Every stone seemed to whisper memories of those who had gone before him. Somewhere within these streets Peter had carried his cross. Somewhere beyond these walls Paul had faced the executioner. The old apostle understood that he now walked where his beloved brothers had walked before meeting their earthly end. Yet instead of fear, he felt profound gratitude. If his own life were soon to follow theirs, he would simply complete the same journey of faith they had already finished. Roman soldiers escorted the prisoners through crowded streets toward detention facilities reserved for those awaiting imperial judgment. Curious citizens paused to watch the chained procession pass by. To them, these were merely criminals whose stories hardly mattered. No one recognized that among the prisoners walked a man whose writings would one day influence billions of people across history. Rome measured greatness by military victories, political influence, wealth, and monuments carved in stone. God measured greatness very differently. Hidden beneath worn clothing and iron chains was a witness whose greatest achievements could not be seen with human eyes. Every step John took through the streets of Rome silently fulfilled the words Jesus had spoken decades earlier, that his followers would stand before kings and rulers as a testimony to the truth. The empire believed it was bringing a dangerous prisoner to judgment. In reality, history was bringing the empire face to face with the final eyewitness of Christ. After several days of confinement, imperial officials informed John that he would appear before a formal hearing arranged under the authority of Emperor Domitian. Such proceedings were designed to project an image of Roman justice, but everyone understood that the outcome had often been decided long before the accused entered the chamber. The trial served political purposes as much as legal ones. By condemning prominent Christians through official procedure, Rome could present persecution as lawful rather than tyrannical. On the morning of the hearing, guards removed John's chains only long enough to prepare him for transport. His hands, weathered by decades of labor and ministry, bore the marks of age rather than violence. As he was led toward the imposing halls where senators, magistrates, and influential priests waited to question him, the elderly apostle quietly prayed, not for acquittal, not for a miraculous escape, but simply for the courage to speak truthfully, whatever the cost. He had spent his entire life proclaiming what he had seen and heard. Standing before the most powerful empire on earth would not change that. Before the day ended, Rome itself would hear from the lips of its oldest prisoner the astonishing testimony of a man who claimed to have walked beside the risen Son of God. The chamber chosen for the proceedings was designed to inspire awe long before a single word was spoken. Towering marble columns stretched toward an elaborately decorated ceiling where Roman victories were carved into stone, reminding every visitor that they stood beneath the authority of the greatest empire the world had ever known. Bronze torches flickered along the walls, their flames reflecting against polished floors where senators, magistrates, military officials, and imperial advisors gradually took their seats. Every detail of the room projected one unmistakable message: Rome possessed absolute power. Countless men had entered these halls believing justice awaited them, only to discover that political necessity often outweighed truth. As guards escorted the elderly apostle inside, conversations briefly faded. Many expected to see a dangerous revolutionary capable of stirring crowds into rebellion. Instead, they found a frail old man walking slowly, supported only by years of unwavering faith. His clothes were plain, his hands showed the wear of decades rather than luxury, and his face carried neither hatred nor fear. Yet there was something impossible to ignore. While nearly everyone else in the chamber relied upon titles, wealth, military rank, or political influence, John possessed a quiet dignity that required none of those things. He stood before the most powerful officials in the Roman Empire without trembling, not because he underestimated their authority, but because he believed there was a higher authority before whom emperors themselves would one day stand. The contrast was striking. Rome displayed its strength through monuments, soldiers, and ceremony. John displayed his through peace. The proceedings began with calculated precision. Imperial scribes unrolled official documents while officers announced the charges prepared against the prisoner. One by one, respected representatives connected to the temple of Artemis stepped forward, presenting accusations carefully crafted to transform a spiritual leader into an enemy of the state. They claimed John encouraged illegal secret gatherings beyond Roman oversight. They insisted he persuaded citizens to reject the ancestral gods who had supposedly protected the empire for centuries. They argued that his refusal to participate in ceremonies honoring Emperor Domitian undermined public unity and inspired widespread disobedience. Then came the most dramatic allegation. Several witnesses declared that extraordinary healings, remarkable conversions, and unexplained events surrounding the Christian movement could only be explained by dangerous sorcery. To many Romans, this accusation sounded entirely believable. The empire accepted the existence of supernatural powers but demanded that such powers remain under acceptable religious control. Anything outside officially recognized worship could easily be portrayed as dark magic. The witnesses spoke confidently, weaving half-truths, exaggerations, and deliberate distortions into a convincing narrative. They described Christianity as a movement that threatened public order, weakened loyalty to Rome, and challenged the emperor's rightful authority. Throughout the accusations, John remained silent. He neither interrupted nor attempted to defend himself prematurely. His calmness unsettled some observers more than any angry protest could have done. When the accusations finally concluded, one senior senator leaned forward with genuine curiosity rather than open hostility. Unlike many present, he appeared interested in understanding the prisoner rather than merely condemning him. Looking directly into the old man's eyes, he asked a simple question that caused the chamber to fall completely silent. "Are you truly the man who knew Jesus of Nazareth?" The words seemed almost insignificant, yet everyone understood their importance. John's answer would reveal whether Christianity rested upon first-hand testimony or merely upon stories passed from generation to generation. Without hesitation, the apostle lifted his eyes and spoke with remarkable clarity. "Yes," he replied. "I knew him." No elaborate introduction. No attempt to impress his audience. Only the quiet certainty of memory. Then, as though decades had vanished in an instant, John began recounting moments no historian could invent because they belonged to his own life. He told them he had walked beside Jesus along the shores of Galilee. He had shared meals with him beneath open skies. He had listened as Christ taught crowds with an authority unlike any rabbi or philosopher. He had watched blind eyes open, broken bodies restored, and hopeless hearts transformed. He described the night of the final supper when Jesus spoke words of love that echoed in his soul even after 60 years. He remembered standing beneath the cross while darkness covered the land, watching the one he loved surrender his life. He spoke of helping remove his lifeless body and witnessing his burial. Then his voice grew even steadier. On the third day, he declared, "I ran to his tomb. It was empty." The simplicity of his testimony carried extraordinary power. He did not argue philosophy. He did not construct complicated theology. He simply described what he had seen with his own eyes. Some members of the assembly shifted uncomfortably. Others exchanged skeptical glances. A few laughed openly, dismissing the testimony of an old man whose beliefs they considered impossible. Yet not everyone mocked him. Several senators remained unusually attentive, recognizing that John spoke with the consistency of genuine memory rather than the uncertainty of fabricated legend. Witnesses who invent stories often embellish details to persuade listeners. John did the opposite. His words were measured, restrained, and deeply personal. He never exaggerated his experiences. He simply described them as someone remembering the defining events of his own life. One official interrupted sharply, demanding to know why Christians refused to worship the emperor if they claimed to respect Roman authority. John's response echoed through the chamber with remarkable gentleness. "We honor rulers," he answered, "we pray for them, and we obey just laws. But worship belongs only to the Creator, never to His creation." Those few words struck the heart of the conflict. Rome demanded absolute allegiance expressed through public worship. Christians could offer loyalty, respect, and obedience in civil matters, but they could never call any earthly ruler Lord and God. That refusal transformed faithful citizens into perceived traitors. The questioning continued for hours. Officials pressed him repeatedly, hoping age or exhaustion might force contradictions into his testimony. They asked whether he would publicly offer incense before the emperor's image to prove his loyalty. John quietly declined. They suggested that one simple gesture would preserve his life and allow him to return peacefully to Ephesus. Again, he declined. They reminded him that nearly all his fellow apostles had already died violent deaths. Surely, they argued, an old man deserved peace after so many years. John's answer revealed the depth of his conviction. "My friends finished their race faithfully," he said. "I cannot dishonor the one they died proclaiming simply to prolong a few remaining days." Those present realized they were not confronting political rebellion but unwavering conscience. The empire could command bodies through force, but it could not command worship freely given from the heart. That truth frustrated officials accustomed to absolute control. Every compromise they offered was rejected with quiet humility. Every threat failed to shake the prisoner's resolve. By the end of the hearing, many recognized that no argument would persuade John to deny Christ. Although the formal proceedings maintained the appearance of legal fairness, the verdict had effectively been determined before the trial began. Domitian's administration could not allow the empire's most recognizable Christian leader to leave Rome publicly vindicated. Such an outcome would embolden believers across the provinces and weaken the emperor's carefully cultivated image as supreme ruler deserving divine honor. After brief consultation, the presiding magistrate rose to announce the judgment. The chamber grew silent as the official decree was read aloud. John was found guilty of sedition against the Roman state, refusal to acknowledge the emperor's divine authority, and persistent promotion of an unlawful religion considered hostile to imperial unity. The punishment chosen was intentionally public and terrifying. It would not be a private execution hidden behind prison walls. Rome intended to make an unforgettable example of the last surviving apostle. John was sentenced to be boiled alive in a massive bronze cauldron of burning oil near the Latin Gate, one of the principal entrances into the city where merchants, travelers, soldiers, and citizens passed daily. The location guaranteed thousands would witness the execution. Rome hoped that fear would accomplish what arguments had failed to achieve. If believers saw the final eyewitness of Jesus perish in agony before their own eyes, perhaps the movement would finally lose its courage. As guards escorted the elderly apostle from the chamber, many assumed they had just watched the closing chapter of his remarkable life. Yet none of those officials, priests, soldiers, or spectators could possibly imagine that the sentence intended to silence John's testimony forever would instead become one of the most astonishing moments preserved in early Christian tradition, a moment that would leave an empire speechless, challenge the authority of Caesar himself, and set the stage for the final divine revelation ever recorded in Scripture. News of the sentence spread through Rome with astonishing speed. Long before the appointed hour, conversations echoed through crowded marketplaces, military barracks, bathhouses, and public squares. Merchants repeated the story to customers, travelers carried it into neighboring districts, and curious citizens abandoned their daily routines to witness what promised to be another dramatic display of Roman justice. Public executions were not uncommon within the empire. They served as carefully orchestrated spectacles designed to reinforce the absolute authority of Caesar. Every punishment carried a political message. Every execution reminded the population that resistance, however noble its motive, would ultimately be crushed beneath the weight of imperial power. Yet there was something different about this particular prisoner. Unlike notorious criminals or rebellious generals, the condemned man was nearly 90 years old. He possessed no army, no political movement, and no visible ambition for earthly power. His only crime, according to many who had quietly investigated the matter, was refusing to worship a man as though he were God. Even among Romans who cared little for Christianity, questions began to emerge. Why would the empire devote so much attention to an elderly teacher? Why would the mighty Rome fear an old man whose greatest weapon appeared to be his testimony? Those questions lingered in countless minds as crowds gradually gathered near the Latin Gate, where the execution would soon unfold before the eyes of the city. The execution site had been prepared with deliberate precision. At the center of the open area stood an enormous bronze cauldron suspended above a roaring furnace whose flames had been burning since before sunrise. Teams of laborers continuously fed heavy logs into the fire while attendants stirred the thick oil with long iron poles, ensuring the temperature remained lethal. Heat radiated outward with such intensity that even soldiers assigned to guard the area kept their distance whenever possible. Waves of shimmering air rose from the bubbling surface, distorting everything behind it. The smell of burning wood mixed with hot oil filled the atmosphere, creating an almost suffocating heaviness. Experienced executioners moved with practiced confidence, carefully inspecting chains, platforms, and lifting mechanisms to ensure nothing interrupted the spectacle. Roman officials wanted absolute efficiency. There would be no opportunity for confusion or sympathy. Everything was intended to demonstrate that defying the emperor always ended the same way. Around the perimeter, heavily armed soldiers established barriers to control the swelling crowd. Vendors opportunistically sold watered wine, bread, roasted meat, and small trinkets to spectators as though they had come to a festival rather than an execution. Children sat upon their fathers' shoulders trying to glimpse the towering cauldron. Philosophers debated whether the prisoners' convictions were admirable or foolish. Some citizens expected cries of agony that would haunt their memories forever. Others attended simply because public executions had become another form of entertainment within the empire. Hidden among the crowd, however, stood men and women whose hearts carried an entirely different burden. They were Christians. They dared not reveal themselves, for doing so could lead to their own arrest. Quietly blending into the multitude, they whispered desperate prayers beneath trembling lips. Many believed they were about to witness the final earthly moments of the last surviving apostle, the final man who had personally walked beside Jesus Christ. Inside a cold stone-holding cell not far from the execution ground, John spent what many assumed would be the last hours of his earthly life. The prison offered little comfort. Moisture seeped through ancient walls, chains scraped across rough stone floors, and faint echoes of distant voices drifted through narrow corridors. Yet the old apostle's thoughts did not dwell upon the suffering awaiting him outside. Instead, his mind journeyed backward through the extraordinary path God had led him along for more than 6 decades. He remembered the clear waters of the Sea of Galilee where he had once worked beside his brother James as an ordinary fisherman, never imagining that one invitation from Jesus would alter the course of history. He remembered leaving his nets without fully understanding why his heart compelled him to follow. Faces long absent from the earth returned vividly to his memory. Peter's unwavering courage despite his failures. James, his own brother, whose martyrdom had come so many years earlier under Herod's sword. Andrew's quiet faith. Philip's relentless devotion. Thomas, once remembered for doubt yet transformed into fearless conviction. Matthew, who had abandoned wealth for truth. Bartholomew, Simon the Zealot, Jude, and the countless believers whose names history would never record but whose faith had shaped the growing church. One by one, they had completed their earthly race. John realized he now stood where every one of his closest companions had once stood, waiting to discover whether faithfulness would require his life. Yet there was no bitterness in his reflection. If anything, gratitude filled his heart. God had allowed him to witness miracles no generation before or after would ever experience. He had seen water become wine, storms silenced by a single command, thousands fed with almost nothing, Lazarus walk from his tomb, and above all, Christ himself rise victorious over death. If his own life now ended, it would simply conclude the testimony entrusted to him many years before. As the appointed hour approached, guards entered the cell carrying iron chains prepared for the condemned prisoner. They expected resistance from a man facing such a horrific death. Instead, they found John quietly praying. One young soldier hesitated before fastening the restraints around the apostle's wrists. He had participated in many executions, yet something about this elderly prisoner unsettled him. There was no panic in his breathing. No desperate bargaining. No trembling voice pleading for mercy. John slowly stood, offering his hands without being forced. According to early Christian tradition, he even thanked the guards for performing the duty assigned to them, reminding them that they answered to earthly authorities just as he answered to God. Such unexpected kindness confused men accustomed to hatred from those they escorted to death. As they led him through dark passageways toward the blinding sunlight outside, John could hear the distant roar of thousands waiting beyond the prison walls. Every step brought him closer to the cauldron whose violent bubbles sent clouds of scorching steam into the Roman sky. Yet the old apostle walked with astonishing steadiness. His body showed the weakness of advanced age, but his spirit appeared stronger than ever. Those escorting him later admitted they felt less like guards leading a condemned criminal and more like ordinary men accompanying someone who had already found peace beyond anything they could understand. When John finally emerged into the open square, an almost indescribable hush spread through portions of the enormous crowd. Many had expected to see a broken man crushed beneath fear. Instead, they saw serenity. The prisoner's white beard moved gently in the morning breeze. His weathered face reflected years of hardship, but no trace of despair. Even beneath heavy chains, he carried himself with quiet dignity. Hidden Christians struggled to hold back tears as they watched the last surviving apostle slowly approach the place prepared for his death. Some silently remembered Jesus' own journey toward Golgotha decades earlier. Others lowered their heads, unable to bear the thought that the final eyewitness might soon disappear forever. Nearby, Roman officials carefully observed every reaction within the crowd. They expected grief among Christians, but they also expected fear. Fear was the true objective. They wanted every believer present to conclude that resistance was hopeless. They wanted mothers to abandon the faith for the safety of their children, elders to surrender their congregations, and young converts to renounce Christ before suffering reached their own homes. The execution was never merely about killing one old man. It was about crushing hope itself. A herald stepped forward and unrolled the imperial decree with ceremonial precision. His voice echoed across the square as he formally announced the charges: refusal to honor the divine majesty of Emperor Domitian, persistent promotion of an unlawful sect, and continued rejection of official worship required throughout the empire. Each accusation concluded with the same declaration, that the sentence had been lawfully approved under Roman authority. When the reading ended, executioners moved into position around the towering cauldron. Flames surged beneath the bronze vessel while thick oil rolled violently across its surface, sending bursts of steam high into the air. Spectators instinctively stepped farther back from the unbearable heat. Soldiers tightened their formation. Every eye fixed upon the elderly apostle standing only a few steps away from what appeared to be certain death. Time itself seemed to slow. The empire believed it was moments away from silencing the final eyewitness of Jesus forever. Yet unseen by everyone present, history stood on the edge of an event that would leave executioners, soldiers, priests, senators, and ordinary citizens confronting something no law, no sword, and no emperor could explain. The executioner received the final signal with a slight nod from the presiding magistrate. Around the blazing furnace, every movement became deliberate, practiced, almost ceremonial. The roaring fire beneath the enormous bronze cauldron had been fed for hours until the oil inside churned violently, releasing clouds of scorching steam into the Roman air. Even standing several yards away was almost unbearable. Soldiers wiped sweat from their brows despite the mild weather, while spectators instinctively shielded their faces from the waves of intense heat rolling outward. No one doubted what would happen next. They had witnessed executions before. Human flesh could not survive such temperatures. The outcome seemed inevitable. Roman authority would once again demonstrate its unquestioned power, and another troublesome voice would disappear into history. Yet among the hidden Christians scattered throughout the crowd, silent prayers continued to rise. They did not pray because they expected God to spare John from death. Many believed they were about to lose the final apostle just as previous generations had lost Peter, Paul, James, Thomas, Andrew, and the others. Instead, they prayed that if this truly was John's final moment, he would remain faithful to Christ until his very last breath. None of them imagined they were standing only moments away from witnessing an event that would echo through Christian history for centuries. The executioners approached the elderly apostle and removed the heavy outer cloak he had worn during his imprisonment. The chains around his wrists and ankles were loosened just enough to allow them to carry out the sentence. Several soldiers stepped forward, expecting the old man to resist as terror overtook him. But John remained astonishingly calm. According to early Christian tradition, His lips moved quietly in prayer as he looked toward heaven, his face reflecting complete trust rather than fear. Some later accounts even describe him giving thanks to God for remaining faithful throughout his long life and entrusting his final moments entirely into the hands of Christ. Those standing closest noticed that his breathing never quickened. His hands did not tremble. His eyes showed neither panic nor despair. It was the same peace that had sustained him through storms on the Sea of Galilee, through decades of persecution, through the deaths of every fellow apostle, and through countless hardships that would have crushed an ordinary man. To the soldiers, such composure made little sense. They had escorted hardened criminals to execution who screamed before punishment even began. Yet this frail old prisoner displayed a confidence stronger than Rome itself. At the command of the chief executioner, several soldiers seized John and lifted him toward the towering cauldron. A gasp rippled through the massive crowd as his aged body disappeared above the rim of the vessel. Then, in one swift movement, they released him into the boiling oil. Many spectators instinctively turned away, unwilling to witness the horror they expected. Others stared in grim fascination, waiting for the inevitable cries of agony to erupt across the square. But no scream came. No desperate struggle shattered the silence. Instead, an eerie stillness settled over the entire execution ground. Confused murmurs replaced confident expectations. Those who had turned away slowly looked back toward the cauldron, uncertain whether they had somehow missed the fatal moment. What they saw defied every law of nature they understood. John was not writhing in unbearable pain. He was not consumed by the boiling oil. According to the testimony preserved by early Christian writers such as Tertullian and Jerome, the apostle remained completely unharmed. The boiling oil, which should have instantly destroyed his body, seemed unable to touch him. Rather than emerging burned and broken, John appeared calm, untouched, and fully alive. Some traditions even describe him as looking refreshed, as though he had stepped from warm water instead of a vessel prepared for execution. Whether every detail was witnessed exactly as later traditions describe, the central claim remained astonishingly consistent throughout early Christian memory: the execution failed. For several long moments, absolute silence covered the square. The deafening noise of the crowd vanished as though the city itself had stopped breathing. Soldiers stood frozen, uncertain whether to continue or retreat. Executioners stared into the cauldron with expressions that quickly shifted from confidence to disbelief. The magistrate who had overseen countless public punishments suddenly found himself confronting something no legal procedure had prepared him to handle. Even the flames beneath the cauldron seemed insignificant compared to the confusion spreading through the gathering. Hidden Christians, unable to contain themselves, quietly fell to their knees with tears streaming down their faces. Some clasped trembling hands in gratitude, convinced they were witnessing divine intervention before the eyes of Rome itself. Others simply wept in overwhelmed silence. Around them, ordinary citizens whispered anxiously. Some insisted they had witnessed a miracle. Others searched desperately for a rational explanation. Could the oil somehow have cooled? Had the execution been staged? Was this old prisoner protected by unknown powers? Questions spread faster than answers. The certainty with which the empire had organized this spectacle evaporated within minutes. Rome had intended to display its strength. Instead, it found itself facing an event that undermined the very purpose of the execution. Word traveled through the city with astonishing speed. Before the crowd had even begun dispersing, messengers rushed toward the imperial palace carrying reports of what had occurred. They struggled to describe the impossible without sounding irrational themselves. The emperor had ordered a public execution. The prisoner had been thrown into boiling oil. Yet the condemned man remained alive. By the time the news reached Emperor Domitian, confusion had already begun spreading among officials responsible for maintaining public order. The situation presented a political crisis unlike any they had anticipated. Executions were designed to reinforce imperial authority, not weaken it. If reports of the failed execution continued circulating unchecked, Christians might interpret the event as undeniable evidence that their God protected his servants against Rome itself. On the other hand, ordering another public attempt at execution carried enormous risks. Should a second miracle, or even the appearance of one, occur before an even larger audience, the consequences could become impossible to control. Every decision now threatened the emperor's carefully cultivated image of unquestionable power. The empire that had mastered armies, conquered kingdoms, and ruled continents suddenly found itself uncertain how to deal with one elderly prisoner. Domitian's advisors debated possible responses. Some demanded immediate execution by another method, arguing that weakness would encourage further defiance among Christians. Others urged caution, recognizing that another failed public punishment could transform John into a living symbol of divine protection throughout the empire. Political reality slowly outweighed personal anger. The emperor needed John removed, not celebrated. Killing him publicly had failed to silence his influence. Allowing him to remain in Rome invited endless speculation. A different solution emerged, one that Rome had used before against troublesome figures whose deaths might inspire sympathy. Rather than creating another martyr, they would erase him from public life. Far from the crowded streets of Ephesus, far from the believers who looked to him for guidance, and far from the attention of Rome itself, there existed a lonely island in the Aegean Sea used as a penal colony for political prisoners. Windswept, rocky, isolated, and difficult to escape, it was a place where prominent dissidents gradually disappeared from history without the drama of public executions. Its name was Patmos. Domitian issued a new decree. John would not die beneath the eyes of the empire. Instead, he would spend the remainder of his days in exile, separated from the churches he loved, forgotten by the world, or so Rome believed. The emperor considered it a practical compromise. He would avoid creating an unstoppable martyr while removing Christianity's last eyewitness from public influence. Yet history was quietly moving in an entirely different direction. The island chosen to silence John would soon become the very place where he would receive the greatest revelation ever entrusted to a human writer, a message destined to outlive every emperor who ever claimed to be Lord of the world. The journey to Patmos began not with triumph, but with silence. There were no cheering crowds, no official ceremonies, and no public announcements celebrating Rome's decision. After the astonishing failure of the execution, imperial authorities wanted as little attention as possible. Before sunrise, while much of the city still slept, a small detachment of soldiers quietly escorted the aging apostle through the harbor. The same empire that had hoped to destroy him before thousands now preferred to make him disappear without notice. A modest transport vessel waited at the dock, carrying supplies, guards, and several other prisoners condemned not to death, but to isolation. Patmos was not a destination anyone chose willingly. It was a place the empire reserved for those considered too influential to remain among society, yet too politically dangerous to execute publicly. As John stepped aboard, he took one final look toward the city of Rome. Somewhere beyond its towering monuments lay the memories of Peter and Paul, who had sealed their testimony there with their blood. Somewhere behind those walls stood the palace of an emperor who believed himself powerful enough to command worship. Yet John felt no hatred toward the city. He prayed for it, just as he had prayed for every place he had ever visited. The ship slowly drifted away from the harbor, and with every passing wave, the great capital faded into the morning mist. Rome believed it was sending an old man into obscurity. Heaven was preparing him for the greatest assignment of his life. The voyage across the Aegean Sea was harsh even for younger men. Powerful winds swept across the open waters, driving relentless waves against the wooden vessel day after day. Unlike merchant ships carrying wealthy passengers, prison transports offered little shelter from the elements. Rain soaked clothing until it clung heavily to the body. Salt water dried upon weathered skin, leaving painful cracks after each passing storm. Nights were especially unforgiving. Cold winds howled across the deck while prisoners huddled together beneath coarse blankets that offered little protection. John's body, already weakened by nearly 9 decades of life, felt every ache and every freezing gust. Yet those traveling beside him noticed something remarkable. The old apostle rarely complained. When others cursed their circumstances, he offered encouragement. When fear spread during violent storms, he quietly reminded frightened prisoners that even the sea remained under the authority of its creator. One young sailor later confessed that watching John's peace affected him more deeply than any sermon he had ever heard. The apostle possessed a calm that could not be explained by favorable circumstances. His confidence rested upon something far greater than physical comfort or personal safety. Every hardship only revealed more clearly where his hope truly belonged. After several difficult days, jagged cliffs slowly emerged from the horizon. Patmos was unlike the fertile cities John had known throughout Asia Minor. There were no magnificent temples rising above prosperous streets. No bustling marketplaces filled with merchants from distant lands. No grand theaters echoing with the voices of thousands. Instead, the island appeared harsh and uninviting. Massive gray rocks dominated the landscape, broken only by scattered shrubs that somehow survived beneath the relentless Mediterranean sun. Powerful winds swept continuously across the barren hills, carrying the crashing sound of waves against steep coastal cliffs. Fresh water was scarce. Fertile soil was limited. Survival itself demanded constant labor. Roman authorities had deliberately chosen such places for political exiles because isolation accomplished what imprisonment often could not. Far removed from cities, separated from family, friends, and followers, influential prisoners gradually disappeared from public memory. As the ship approached the rocky shoreline, soldiers prepared to unload supplies while prisoners were ordered onto the narrow landing area. John stepped carefully onto the island that Rome intended to become his final home. Looking across the desolate landscape, he could easily have viewed it as the end of his ministry. Humanly speaking, every opportunity appeared gone. He had been separated from the churches he loved, stripped of his freedom, and placed where almost no one would ever hear him preach again. But throughout Scripture, God had repeatedly chosen wilderness places to accomplish extraordinary purposes. Moses encountered God far from Egypt. Elijah heard the gentle voice of the Lord in lonely mountains. Even Jesus often withdrew into solitude before pivotal moments in his ministry. Unknown to Rome, Patmos would soon become another sacred wilderness. Life on the island followed a difficult routine. Exiles were expected to contribute to manual labor, assisting with tasks that supported the small penal settlements scattered among Patmos' rugged terrain. Tradition suggests that prisoners worked among rocky quarries, carried heavy loads, repaired pathways, and performed whatever labor Roman overseers required. For a man approaching 90 years of age, every assignment demanded enormous physical effort. Yet John accepted each day without resentment. According to early Christian tradition, a young disciple remained nearby to assist him whenever possible, providing food, helping with daily necessities, and preserving the writings that would soon change history. During quieter hours, John sought refuge among the island's natural caves and mountain grottos. Away from the noise of labor and the watchful eyes of guards, he devoted himself to prayer and meditation upon the scriptures he had treasured throughout his life. The barren cliffs became places of worship. The endless sound of crashing waves became a constant reminder of the Creator's majesty. While Rome saw only an isolated prisoner, heaven saw a faithful servant whose heart remained entirely available despite every earthly loss. Solitude, which many considered punishment, gradually became preparation. As weeks turned into months, John's longing for the churches of Asia never faded. He thought often of Ephesus, where believers continued gathering despite persecution. He wondered about struggling families in Smyrna, faithful Christians surrounded by hostility in Pergamum, weary disciples in Thyatira, complacent hearts in Laodicea, and every congregation that had depended upon his guidance for so many years. Unable to travel, he carried them continually before God in prayer. Every remembered face became another petition lifted toward heaven. He may have felt physically separated from them, but spiritually he remained their shepherd. Even in exile, his ministry continued through intercession. It was during these lonely days that John likely reflected more deeply than ever upon the promises Jesus had spoken decades earlier. Christ had warned his disciples that they would suffer persecution. He had promised that they would stand before rulers and kings. He had assured them that he would never leave nor forsake them. Looking back across nearly 70 years of faithful discipleship, John could testify that every one of those promises had proven true. Christ had remained faithful through every storm, every prison, every funeral, every hardship, and every disappointment. If the Lord had preserved him through all those years, then even this lonely island must somehow belong within God's greater purpose. Then came a day unlike any other. It was the Lord's Day, a Sunday set apart for worship and remembrance of Christ's resurrection. As the morning light spread across the rocky hills of Patmos, John withdrew into quiet prayer, just as he had done countless times before. Nothing about the landscape suggested that history was about to change. The wind continued sweeping across the cliffs. Waves crashed endlessly against the shoreline below. The island remained as silent and desolate as ever. Yet while the world saw only an old exile praying in isolation, heaven was preparing to open before his eyes. In just a few moments, the same apostle who had once walked beside Jesus in Galilee would encounter the risen Christ in a glory beyond anything he had ever witnessed, not merely as the humble teacher who had washed his disciples' feet, but as the eternal King whose majesty would leave even his closest friend trembling. The island that Rome had chosen to erase John's influence was about to become the place from which God would reveal his final message to the world, a revelation so profound that it would strengthen persecuted believers for generations, expose the temporary nature of every earthly empire, and proclaim with absolute certainty that no throne, no tyrant, and no kingdom could ever overcome the everlasting reign of Jesus Christ. The morning began like countless others. The first rays of sunlight slowly crept across the rugged cliffs of Patmos, casting long shadows over the barren landscape as the endless rhythm of crashing waves echoed against the rocky shoreline below. A cool breeze carried the scent of salt through the narrow mountain paths while seabirds circled overhead, their distant cries disappearing into the vastness of the Aegean sky. Nothing about the island suggested that history was about to witness one of its most extraordinary moments. To the Roman Empire, Patmos remained nothing more than a forgotten penal colony where troublesome prisoners faded into obscurity. No emperor gave the island a second thought. No senator imagined that events unfolding there would one day be studied by generations yet unborn. Hidden among its weathered cliffs, an elderly exile quietly sought the presence of God. John had followed this pattern for years. Whenever possible, he withdrew from distraction to pray, meditate upon the scriptures, and remember the words Jesus had spoken decades earlier. The isolation that Rome intended as punishment had become a sanctuary where earthly noise gradually gave way to heavenly focus. Every hardship had stripped away another layer of worldly concern until only one desire remained, to know Christ more deeply. On this particular Lord's Day, as John entered a season of profound spiritual contemplation, nothing in his earthly surroundings appeared unusual. Yet beyond the limits of human sight, heaven itself was preparing to unveil realities no living person had ever witnessed. Without warning, the silence shattered. Behind him came a voice unlike anything he had ever heard. It was not merely loud. It possessed an authority that seemed to penetrate every part of his being, like the clear blast of a mighty trumpet echoing across mountains before the arrival of a great king. The sound carried absolute certainty, leaving no room for doubt or confusion. John had heard many unforgettable voices throughout his long life. He had listened as fishermen called across the waters of Galilee. He had heard Roman governors pronounce judgments. He had stood beneath the cross and listened to Jesus utter his final earthly words. But this voice surpassed them all. It was both familiar and overwhelming, gentle yet majestic, intimate yet infinitely powerful. Instinctively, John turned to see who had spoken. What met his eyes could scarcely be described with ordinary human language. Standing before him was Jesus Christ, but not as John had known him during his earthly ministry. Gone was the appearance of humble servanthood that had once walked dusty roads beside ordinary men. Before him now stood the glorified, exalted, eternal Lord of all creation. He wore a long robe reaching to his feet, bound across his chest with a radiant golden sash symbolizing royal authority and perfect priesthood. His hair shone white like pure wool, brilliant as freshly fallen snow, revealing eternal wisdom untouched by time. His eyes burned like blazing fire, penetrating every secret, every hidden motive, every corner of the human heart. His feet gleamed like polished bronze refined within a furnace, unshakable and magnificent. His voice carried the overwhelming force of countless rushing waters, commanding attention not through violence but through absolute authority. In his right hand he held 7 stars, while from his mouth proceeded a sharp two-edged sword representing the irresistible power of divine truth. His face radiated with such brilliance that it resembled the sun shining at its full strength, making every earthly light seem insignificant by comparison. For a brief moment, John simply stared. This was the same Jesus he had followed beside the Sea of Galilee. The same Savior who had multiplied loaves and fish for hungry crowds. The same friend who had washed his disciples' feet with astonishing humility. The same Master whose head had rested upon a crown of thorns before hanging upon a Roman cross. Yet now John understood more clearly than ever that Christ's earthly humiliation had never diminished his eternal glory. The one standing before him was not merely a resurrected teacher. John later struggled to describe the vision because earthly language seemed painfully inadequate. Every image he recorded pointed beyond itself toward realities too magnificent for ordinary words. Confronted by such holiness, the apostle could no longer remain standing. The same man who had leaned upon Jesus during the Last Supper now collapsed at his feet as though dead. This was not the reaction of fear alone. It was the natural response of a finite human being standing in the unveiled presence of infinite holiness. Throughout Scripture, whenever ordinary people encountered the overwhelming glory of God, strength left their bodies. Isaiah cried that he was undone. Ezekiel fell upon his face. Daniel lost all physical strength. Now John experienced the same reality. Even after decades of faithful service, the full majesty of Christ exceeded everything he had ever imagined. Then came one of the most beautiful moments in all of Scripture. The glorified Christ did not leave his beloved disciple lying in helpless terror. Instead, he reached down and placed his right hand upon John, the very same hand that had once touched lepers, lifted broken people from despair, calmed storms, and blessed little children. Although Christ now appeared in indescribable heavenly glory, his compassion remained unchanged. His first words were not words of judgment but of reassurance. Do not be afraid. Throughout the Bible, these words repeatedly accompany divine encounters because God understands the weakness of those who stand before him. Jesus then revealed the foundation for that confidence. I am the first and the last. I am the living one. I was dead, and behold, I am alive forevermore, and I hold the keys of death and Hades. Every phrase shattered the claims of earthly rulers. Domitian demanded to be called Lord and God. Christ declared himself eternal before all things and victorious beyond death itself. Caesar could sentence prisoners to execution, but Jesus held authority over death's very gates. Empires could imprison bodies, but they could never imprison the risen King. For John, these words carried profound personal meaning. Only months earlier, Rome had attempted to silence him through execution and exile. Now Christ reminded his aging disciple that no emperor possessed ultimate authority. History remained firmly under the government of the one who had conquered the grave forever. The Lord then entrusted John with a mission greater than anything he had previously imagined. He was commanded to write down everything he was about to see and send the message to the 7 churches scattered throughout Asia, the very congregations that had occupied his prayers every day of exile. What seemed like cruel separation suddenly revealed a higher purpose. Rome had removed John from those churches physically, believing his influence would finally disappear. Instead, Christ would now speak directly to every congregation through the very apostle whom Rome had tried to silence. Each church would receive words perfectly suited to its own spiritual condition. Encouragement for those enduring persecution. Correction for those drifting into compromise. Warning for those growing spiritually complacent. Hope for believers tempted to surrender beneath overwhelming pressure. Heaven had not forgotten them. Their struggles were fully known by the one walking among the 7 golden lampstands, symbolizing his continual presence within his church. John immediately realized that exile had never interrupted God's plan. It had become the setting through which the Lord himself would address his people. As the vision continued unfolding, the boundaries separating earth from heaven seemed to disappear. John beheld an open door standing in heaven, inviting him to witness realities hidden from every earthly empire. Beyond that doorway stood a throne unlike any throne Rome had ever constructed. It required no army to defend it, no senate to sustain it, no political intrigue to preserve it. Every emperor throughout history ruled only temporarily, but this throne stood eternal, occupied by the Almighty whose authority had neither beginning nor end. Around it shone the radiance of precious stones and an emerald rainbow proclaiming both divine majesty and covenant faithfulness. 24 elders bowed continually in worship, while 4 living creatures ceaselessly declared, "Holy, holy, holy is the Lord God Almighty." Before the throne, countless voices united in perfect praise. Everything John had witnessed on earth, the rise and fall of kingdoms, the cruelty of persecution, the arrogance of emperors, the suffering of believers, was now placed into its proper perspective. Above every earthly conflict, beyond every temporary kingdom, the sovereign God still reigned exactly as he always had. And this was only the beginning. The visions about to unfold would reveal the destiny of nations, the spiritual battle behind human history, the ultimate defeat of evil, and the glorious future awaiting all who remained faithful to Christ until the end. As John stood in awe before the throne of heaven, he quickly realized that he was not merely witnessing a vision of unimaginable beauty, he was being invited to see history from God's perspective. Everything he had experienced on earth suddenly appeared within a far greater reality. The mighty Roman Empire that seemed unstoppable from below looked astonishingly small before the throne of the Almighty. The emperors who demanded worship possessed no authority here. Their crowns, armies, monuments, and decrees carried no weight in this place. Before the throne lay what appeared like a crystal sea, perfectly calm, reflecting the glory of heaven without the slightest disturbance. It was the complete opposite of the restless world John had left behind, a world filled with persecution, violence, injustice, and fear. Here there was no uncertainty. No rebellion threatened God's authority. Every created being existed in perfect harmony with its Creator. The 4 living creatures never ceased declaring His holiness, while the 24 elders continually removed their crowns and cast them before the throne, acknowledging that every honor, every victory, and every position of authority ultimately belonged to God alone. Every event unfolding upon earth remained beneath His sovereign authority, even when human eyes could not perceive His purposes. Then John's attention was drawn towards something that immediately filled heaven with profound anticipation. In the right hand of the one seated upon the throne rested a scroll unlike anything John had ever seen. It was written on both sides and securely sealed with 7 seals, signifying that its contents remained completely inaccessible unless someone worthy could open it. Suddenly, a mighty angel proclaimed with a voice that echoed throughout heaven, "Who is worthy to open the scroll and break its seals?" The question seemed to reverberate across all creation. Silence followed. No angel stepped forward. No elder approached the throne. No powerful ruler from history appeared capable of claiming such authority. John watched as heaven itself waited. The weight of that silence became unbearable. If no one could open the scroll, God's final purposes for history would remain hidden. Justice would remain incomplete. Evil would continue unchecked. The promises made to generations of faithful believers would appear unresolved. Overwhelmed by the significance of what he was witnessing, John later confessed that he began to weep deeply because no one seemed worthy to open the scroll or even look inside it. For a brief moment, the entire vision appeared suspended between expectation and heartbreak. Then one of the elders gently spoke to the grieving apostle. "Do not weep." Those simple words immediately changed everything. The elder pointed John's attention toward the center of heaven and announced, "Behold, the Lion of the tribe of Judah, the Root of David, has triumphed." John expected to see a mighty conquering lion approaching the throne. Instead, when he turned, he saw something even more astonishing. Standing at the very center of heaven was a lamb that appeared to have been slain. It bore the marks of sacrifice, yet it stood fully alive. In that breathtaking image, John understood one of the greatest mysteries of God's kingdom. Christ had conquered not by avoiding suffering, but through it. His victory had not come by crushing his enemies through military power, but by offering himself as the perfect sacrifice for the sins of humanity. The wounds of Calvary had become the very symbols of eternal triumph. The Lamb approached the throne and took the scroll from the hand of the Almighty. At that instant, heaven erupted into worship unlike anything John had ever witnessed. The living creatures fell before the Lamb. The 24 elders bowed in adoration, each holding golden bowls filled with the prayers of God's people. Thousands upon thousands of angels joined their voices together until the praise became beyond counting. Every creature in heaven, on earth, under the earth, and in the sea united in declaring blessing, honor, glory, and power to the one seated upon the throne and to the Lamb forever. John suddenly realized that the center of heaven was not occupied by military strength or political authority. It was occupied by the crucified and risen Christ. As the Lamb broke the first seal, history itself seemed to unfold before John's eyes. A rider mounted upon a white horse emerged, symbolizing conquest as kingdoms pursued domination over one another. When the second seal was opened, another horse appeared, fiery red in color, representing the terrible reality of war that would remove peace from the earth and turn nation against nation. The third seal revealed a black horse carrying scales, announcing famine, economic hardship, and desperate inequality as ordinary families struggled merely to survive. Then came the fourth horse, pale and terrifying, whose rider was called Death, followed closely by Hades itself. Wherever this rider passed, destruction spread through sword, hunger, disease, and countless forms of human suffering. These visions were not random images intended merely to inspire fear. They revealed that the brokenness humanity experienced throughout history resulted from a world scarred by sin and rebellion against God. John recognized patterns familiar even within his own lifetime. He had witnessed wars, famines, persecution, and countless deaths. Yet heaven showed him that none of these events unfolded outside God's ultimate knowledge or sovereign plan. The Lamb who opened the seals remained firmly in control even while history moved through seasons of unimaginable turmoil. With each succeeding vision, the intensity increased. John saw faithful believers crying out beneath the heavenly altar, asking how long justice would remain delayed. He witnessed cosmic disturbances so overwhelming that the sun darkened, the moon appeared like blood, stars seemed to fall from the heavens, and mighty rulers hid in caves, suddenly realizing that earthly power offered no protection before the judgment of God. Then another dramatic vision unfolded. A great red dragon appeared, filled with rage, seeking to destroy a child destined to rule the nations. Though the imagery carried profound symbolic meaning, John understood the deeper reality behind it. The conflict facing Christians was never merely political. Behind earthly persecution stood a far greater spiritual battle between the kingdom of God and the forces of evil. He then beheld a terrifying beast rising from the sea, demanding universal allegiance and receiving worship from those whose hearts rejected God. For believers living under Domitian's rule, the symbolism would have been unmistakable. They had already witnessed an emperor insisting upon divine honors. They understood what it meant to face pressure to worship earthly rulers rather than Christ. John's vision exposed the deeper spiritual reality behind imperial arrogance. Every earthly power that demanded ultimate worship stood in direct opposition to the kingdom of God. Empires rose and fell, but the spirit of rebellion against the Creator repeatedly resurfaced throughout history under different names and different rulers. Yet despite the terrifying scenes unfolding before him, the revelation never left John without hope. Every vision of darkness was followed by an even greater revelation of God's sovereignty. Evil appeared powerful, but never permanent. Satan raged fiercely because his time was limited. Tyrants exercised authority for a season, but never forever. The beast inspired fear, yet its defeat had already been written into God's eternal plan. John saw the final judgment where every act of injustice would be answered with perfect righteousness. He witnessed death itself ultimately destroyed. He beheld a new heaven and a new earth where the curse of sin would finally disappear forever. There would be no more mourning, no more suffering, no more pain, and no more tears, because God Himself would dwell among His people. Every promise Christ had made throughout His earthly ministry reached its glorious fulfillment. For persecuted Christians hiding in homes across Asia Minor, these visions would become an anchor stronger than fear itself. Rome could confiscate property, imprison believers, and even take earthly lives, but it could never prevent the future God had already prepared. As John faithfully recorded every revelation, likely dictating the words to the young disciple assisting him within the rugged solitude of Patmos, he understood that this message was never intended merely to predict future events. It was given to strengthen weary believers, expose the temporary nature of every earthly empire, and proclaim with absolute certainty that Jesus Christ, the Lamb who was slain and now reigns forever, would have the final word over all of history.